There's another COVID relief bill making its way through Congress with the price tag of 1.9 trillion. The other two relief bills had similar price tags attached to them. And I think most people, when we look at the bills and how the money was spent, it was mostly used to help the already rich and powerful. I believe one of the last bills, like 25% or less of the money inside of the bill actually went to people, which is a pretty big problem. But I would like to take a different angle when looking at this. And I'm kind of surprised nobody has talked about this. I'll take that back. I'm not surprised. This has been something that has been developing for a long time. And that is that in the main conversation around these sorts of things, nobody talks about how much these things cost anymore. A bill can pass the House and the Senate, can be signed by the president, and it has a $2 trillion price tag on it, and nobody wonders about where the money comes from or what the results of all of that money entering the economy in various ways is going to do. So I'd like to talk about the Federal Reserve, and that is the answer to that question. The Federal Reserve controls the money supply for the United States and the dollar in general. I think a lot of people are operating off of old information. Some people thinking that there's a gold standard of some sort, which we haven't had since the 70s, or that the United States Treasury is in charge of monetary policy, how much money there is in the economy. But those aren't true, and they haven't been for a long time. With the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, that is the organization that controls the money supply in the economy and the interest rates in general for the entire economy, mortgages, savings accounts, business loans, everything. It's touched by what the Federal Reserve chooses to do. I've heard the Federal Reserve described as the lender of last resort for the federal government. And so what is the lender of last resort? It's a organization, or it's a entity that can loan money to a person or a company or a government when they have no other options for raising money for paying off their bills. And I believe lender of last resort is a term that is mainly focused on the relationship between a central bank like the Federal Reserve and a government. The Federal Reserve has several functions that it takes care of. It manages a series of Federal Reserve banks throughout the United States. I believe there are 12 of them. And it has a number of functions for managing and regulating the banking industry. But for now, I think the most important thing I want to talk about is its relationship to the federal government and how it enables the federal government to live beyond its means. I was reading an article recently when I was doing some research for this video, and as of 2020, I'll link it below, the federal government brought in, I think it was $3.5 trillion in taxes, and on budget it was scheduled to spend I think 4.5 trillion. But I believe that number is much higher now that these various relief bills have been passed. So how does the Federal Reserve get cash into the federal government's hands? First, let me cover how the federal government can raise funds outside of taxation. So the Treasury can create bonds that it sells to governments, businesses, foreign governments, local governments, in order to raise money. And these bonds have an interest rate attached to them. So they're basically loans that that you and I and various organizations are giving to the government. And after however long it takes for them to yield, a year, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, the government promises to pay you back that much money plus an additional amount. This is the mechanism that the Federal Reserve uses to infuse cash into the federal government. It purchases treasury bonds, and then the government can turn around and pay for whatever programs that they want to. The problem there's sort of two problems to this. The federal government has conditioned itself to believe that it can spend as much as it wants forever. Right now, the national debt, which is the amount of money that the government has spent over what it has brought in, more precisely, it's how much it has borrowed from the Federal Reserve, from foreign governments, from the people. And that is around 27 trillion this year. And it's been growing faster and faster every year. This is dangerous because the debt is created from all of these loans that the government takes. And loans, as everybody knows, you have to pay back more than what you are given. This is pretty alarming. So it's called paying the interest on the debt. And the federal government, for the year of 2020, paid $500 billion in interest on the debt. And that is to the Federal Reserve, to foreign governments, to everybody it lends treasuries to, or sells treasury bonds to. That's $500 billion just in interest. And paying off the interest is not the same as paying off the principal. So the debt is not going down. This is just to not default on the debt that it has taken upon itself. And these relief bills add directly to the debt, since there is no buffer room in the budgets. Nowadays, actually, the United States, when it budgets, hasn't budgeted properly in a long time, where a budget passes through Congress and is signed by the president. They do more of these stopgap budgets where they just plan for the next 6 months, and they say, okay, we need this much money, and they borrow what they need, and they allocate accordingly. But they even budget in. They can't even budget to where they spend as much as they take in. It's common practice now to just slap in the amount of money they need to borrow to maintain their offices and the various departments. 500 billion is more than we pay, or more than Medicare uses in a typical year. I'm sorry, it's Medicaid. More than Medicaid. The defense budget is approximately 690 billion. There's a long-term issue associated with the government taking on this amount of debt, because the Federal Reserve also knows that the United States government is in a pickle. It has an immense amount of debt, and it has to pay an immense amount of interest on that debt. And that is directly influenced in the interest rates that the Treasury uses when lending out its bonds. So the Federal Reserve, I would almost say, colludes with the federal government to keep interest rates artificially low. And the way that the economy is designed, the interest rates on Treasury bonds and the interest rates set by the Federal Reserve impact interest rates across the entire economy. Your savings account, your mortgages, your business loans, all affected by these fundamental interest rates. And there's a number of problems that can occur from this. With low interest rates on savings accounts, people are disincentivized from saving. They're incentivized to throw their money into the stock market, which is nearly a casino. If you invest smartly, you can grow your wealth. But if you're not careful, it could hurt you in the long run. So now everybody's money is in the stock market, which we can argue inflates the prices in the stock market, inflates its value, and people are not saving as much. So likely in the future, they are not going to have money for retirement. Mortgage rates are at historic lows, which encourages more people to buy houses and take on mortgages, which if you increase the demand for something, the price will go up. So housing prices are likely higher than they would be. And more people are getting mortgages than should be because they're easier to get. And I think something like this can create a bubble where many people are unable to pay their mortgages. And this is something that happened in 2008. And so I think the final thing I'd like to say is our political landscape is so morphed and detached from reality that it imagines there is no scarcity of money. In practical terms, you can argue that there is no scarcity, and there are some people out there that make the argument that you can print as much money as you want as long as the negative results of that aren't too high. But I don't think anybody can point to specific metrics for when it does become too high, and so that's just playing with fire, in my opinion. But now the left and the right, the two major political parties, don't even talk about money. The public at large doesn't talk about the debt and what that could do long term, how much money we're wasting on paying the interest, and the media doesn't talk about it. So now we are living in a zeitgeist that doesn't take into account one of the central pillars, the central building blocks of an economy, which is its money, its long-term value, how much people trust it. The Federal Reserve, just one last point. The Federal Reserve was created in 2013, and since then I've seen a number of articles and people claiming that the dollar's lost 98% of its value since then. And so even with this pseudo-governmental organization, which has never been audited, by the way, fully, is charged with maintaining the value of the dollar, and over its lifetime it has destroyed nearly all of its value, which is another way in which savers are punished, because not only are interest rates low on savings accounts, so you can't just throw your money into a bank and have a safe way to grow your capital. There's a lot of inflation, which they aim for 2% a year. And with your bank account that earns 0.001% a year, you are losing money keeping it in a bank. Regardless of your political affiliation, we all need to start asking, where's the money coming from, and is it worth it? All right, thanks for listening. See ya.